With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Mem Dalid. We left off on Mem Dalid, Amud Aleph, all the way on top. We are continuing the sugya about the Arava. We are going to be explaining why is it that post-temple, the Zecher LeMikdash, for which is the source why we take the Arava now on the seventh day of Sukkot, is only done on the seventh day of Sukkot, and it's not done every single day, even though in the Beis HaMikdash the ceremony with the Arava was done every single day. We're going to learn the difference between that which is called Yesoid Nevi'im, a enactment of the prophets, versus that which is called Minhag HaNevi'im, a custom from the prophets. We're going to see how the Torah was not forgotten at all during the Golus of Bavel. We're going to see that there is a machlokes Rishonim. We're going to speak out whether we make a bracha prior to fulfilling a custom. Do we make a bracha for a minhag? That's going to be really a machlokes Tosfos and Rambam. The Tosfos we're going to learn today, and that trickles down and that goes into halacha machlokes Mechaber and Ramah, and we'll give examples of that. The biggest example is whether we make a bracha prior to reciting of the Hallel during Rosh Chodesh. Reciting the Hallel on Yom Tov is a rabbinic enactment. Reciting the Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is only a minhag. We're going to learn about the minimum amount of aravas that we need to take. There's a minimum amount al pi nigla. Then there is al pi kabbalah. We know that nowadays we take 5 aravas. We're going to go a little bit into some more laws of Shemitah. We will learn that hoeing is something that at times is permitted even on the Shemitah year. We're going to have beautiful Agadic statements. The Gemara is going to tell us that that a person should not travel more than 3 parsa on Friday. We learned in brachas that an average person travels 10 parsa a day. This is when a person traveled by foot. If a person will only travel the 3, as the Gemara is suggesting now, that means that they will set out as like every day early in the morning, but they will reach their destination way many hours before Shabbos, which will give people enough time to know that they will be there for Shabbos, which will give people enough time to prepare food for them for Shabbos, and that will prevent of them getting angry, as we'll learn more details when we learn the Gemara. And finally, the last part of today's daf will be going back to that part of the Mishnah that prior to the Takana, when the lulav was still taken in the Beis HaMikdash, on the first day of Sukkot, even though when it fell on Shabbos. So we had that whole issue of people fighting over the Dalad Minim. But so they changed it. Prior to changing it, we're going to learn that there are really 2 versions in the Pshat in the Mishnah, in the words in the Mishnah, to know where would they put the lulavim. Did they put it on top of the roofs that were over the benches, or did they put them on the benches dafka under the roofs, and much, much more. Chavra Daf Mem Dalid Amud Aleph, and the top line, Ve'ela Kasha Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shakol Nivei Dvari. So where are we up to? We are up to that residents of Eretz Yisrael nowadays, meaning post-temple, post-second temple, prior to the third temple, do not take the lulav on Shabbos Sukkot, even if it is on the first day of Sukkot, unlike the Havamina that we had yesterday. It's not done in order, like we learned, for there to be a consistency between the communities in Eretz Yisrael and the communities in Chutz La'aretz. Lois is goydadu. I know that this is something that everyone is going to wonder about, and it's not a black and white concept. Let's just start with the fact that we keep 2 days Yantiv and they only keep 1. Just focus on that. Nevertheless, when it comes to this detail, here we do apply the lois is going to do. But how did we get to that conclusion? Why did we think yesterday that in Eretz Yisrael, even post-second temple, pre-third temple, they took it on Shabbos? Is because we had a contradiction in Mishnayos, and the Gemara is going to go back to that. Okay, so now that we made it clear that there is no difference regarding this between Bavel, meaning Jews living anywhere else other than the Holy Land, and Yidden that live in Eretz Yisrael. No one nowadays, no one before the building of the third temple takes the lulav on Shabbos Sukkahs, even if it's the first day of Sukkahs. So the Ella Kasha, let's go back to remind, let's chazer. Hani Tarte, the following two Mishnayos that appear to be contradicting each other, because the Tanach in one Mishnah says, Kol ha'omer lichanes lulaveim laharabayis, that when it fell out on the first day, when Shabbos falls out on the first day of Sukkahs, people took it, this is during the temple. But where did they take it? They took it in the Beis HaMikdash, which is why they needed to bring the lulavim to Temple Mount. Guys, they didn't have to bring it into the Beis HaMikdash because Harabayis, Temple Mount, is surrounded with walls, and therefore it has a bona fide din of it, Reshus HaYachid, so there was no issue taking it from the inside of Harabayis to any other place in that area. Problem was, but V'tana Idach, or V'tanya Idach, here it refers to another Mishnah, that it was brought to the Beis HaKnesses. Doesn't that Mishnah refer to the times after the temple was destroyed? And that's how we answered above. Umitar Tzinon, indeed. That Khan, the Mishnah that speaks about taking the lulavim to Temple Mount, was Bizman Beis HaMikdash Kayim. The Mishnah that mentions bringing the lulavim to a Beis HaKnesses, to a synagogue, was Bizman during the times that the temple was not standing. Does that not again indicate that in Eretz Yisrael, even post Second Temple, when Shabbos falls out on the first day of Sukkah, they still took it? So the Gemara says, no, again, we're standing our ground. That Eretz Yisrael and Bavel are the same, that we don't take the lulav on Shabbos Sukkot, even if it is on the first day of Sukkot. The other Mishnah was also speaking about during the times of the temple, when the people lived in Yerushalayim, or when you lived near the Holy Temple. Yes, of course, you went to daven in the Beis HaMikdash, and you wanted your lulav to be taken in the Beis HaMikdash, and you brought it there Erev Shabbos. Kan, the other Mishnah, is also only Bizman Shebeis HaMikdash Kayim. Why does the Mishnah mention taking your lulav to a Beis HaKnesses? Is because you live bigvulin. Here, the word gevulin doesn't mean any place out of the temple. Bigvulin means you live far away from the temple. Not every Jew, even during the times of the temple, was able to daven always in the Beis HaMikdash. They would go to a Beis HaKnesses. Bizman Habayis, yes, everyone would take lulav on Shabbos when it's on the first day of Sukkot. But post-temple, again, Lois is going to do, and no longer will we put away the fear of Rabbah. We will take in count that which Rabbah brought up, and because of the amazing responsibility that one Jew has for the other, not to somehow create a setting where one might violate the Shabbos. It's better for no Jew to take the lulav nowhere than anyone carrying a lulav b'shoigig, asking the baki how to make the bracha or how to wave it, etc. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amalei Abaya, either to Rabba, to his colleague, or L'Rava, to his chaver, or L'Rabba, as the Bachim means, to his teacher. Gavaldik, a simple question. Maishna lulav, that in the present day, aside of Shabbos, the Avdinon, Lei Shiva, I know Shiva doesn't mean Shiva, but that we take the lulav every single day, even though we already learned the Braisa, that biblically, whether there is a temple, whether there's no temple, biblically, lokachtem lochem the lulav only on the first day. Yet we take it 7 days. Why? Zeichel HaMikdash. Guys, in the Beis HaMikdash, the Arava ceremony was also done every day of the 7 days. Again, aside of Shabbos. But theoretically, it's done all 7 days. Today, when do we do the Arava? Now, guys, I know that we say Hoishanas every day. But when do we actually do the minhag, or the yisoid of banging the aravos on the ground? That is what we do, Zeichel HaMikdash. Only 1 day. Why? We should do the 7 days. My kids that sell the aravos, or maybe, and now that Svika's kids took it over, they'll make a killing. You're kidding? Imagine every day you're going to buy yourself a couple of 5 Hoishanas. It will be phenomenal. Why don't we do it every single day? I just want to say that I mentioned the word banging. We're going to come back to that because when we learned yesterday that beraisa that uses the words chibut and we translated it lefishitas Rashi that they used to wave it, we'll get back to that soon in the Gemara. There's actually a machlokes rishonim what they did in the Beis Hamikdash aside of the machlokes we learned yesterday, whether they netila it, whether they took it in their hands and walked around the mizbeach, or whether they would lean it against the mizbeach. Aside of that argument that we have in the Gemara, there is another question how to interpret the words chibut. We'll get back to that. The bottom line is that nowadays we do it by banging the aravis. It's a very interesting minig. Why don't we do it every day? So answers the Gemara, Amalei hoyel va'adam yoitzi yedei chayvasi ba'arava shebelulav, because the Gavaldika initial answer. Guys, don't forget that in the lulav you have a arava. We actually have two aravis. So when you and we take the lulav every day. So it's just a zecher. So when you pick up the lulav, you have a zecher also for the arava that was taken in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, where exactly is the remembrance in your mind? Because the action of taking the lulav, the action itself doesn't indicate anything. Because you're obligated to take the lulav as the mitzvah of taking the lulav, or as the zecher lemigdash taking the lulav. So narvas then, the havamina is that even though the action is the action of netilas lulav, that's the bracha netilas lulav, but you will be mechavein, you'll have in mind that it's also a zecher for the aravas that were taken. Amalei, so the Gemara asks that that's not good enough. A remembrance by Yidden is not in your mind. That's never sufficient, or hardly ever sufficient. That has to be an action. Amalei ahu mishum lulav de ka'avidlei. In other words, your action offers zero remembrance. The fact that you're taking it up, you're taking it in your hand because of the mitzvah of dalad minim. Verstehst? And if you're going to counter and say, no, what he meant is that you take it once for netilas lulav, you put it down, and you take it a second time. And the second taking, so that's an action with the intent, also zecher la'arava. Says the Gemara, that's not true. That's not factually true. Because we de facto don't take it twice. So we're back to the question. Lulav is taken every day. Midoiraisa lulav only has to be taken the first day. Why do we take it every day? Zeichel HaMikdash. Well, make a Zeichel HaMikdash for Ravas also. And take it 7 days. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Zavid. In the name of Rav, I'll tell you the difference. Lulav, which is the Oiraisa. So therefore, Avdin and Shiva Zeichel HaMikdash. But Arava, now listen to these words, and I know that we learned clearly otherwise, but here are the words. That Arava, which is only Midrabanan, so since to begin with it's only rabbinic, Lo Yavdin and Lo Shiva Zeichel HaMikdash. Yes, for 1 day, but since even in the temple, it's not Mido Eiraisa. And the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Leman. Who will be the opinion that holds that it's not Mido Eiraisa? If you're going to tell me this follows the opinion of Abba Shaul, can be. Because it said when the Pasuk writes, and we had this on Daf Lamed Dalid, in the plural, Arvei Nachal, willows of the brook. Why is it in plural? Abba Shaul says, Shtayim. One is alluding to the Aravais that are put, to the willows that are put in the Lulav bundle. And the other of the plural is referring to the aravais that were taken by the Kaihanim, either waven or held or beaten, put around the Mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash. So according to Abba Shaul, it's scripturally sourced. And if we're not going to follow the Abba Shaul, remember there are other limudim that we had from the plural. One was that it doesn't have to be from the brook. But they, well, even if it's not sourced in scripture, but it is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which is also biblical. The Amar Avasi in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. In the name of Rab Nechunya, Ish Bikas Beis Charson, a man of the valley of an area called Beis Charson. That what? The following 3 rules. First of all, the rule of Eser Netiyos. Guys, we already had this above. Number 1, on the Shemitah year, most of the workings on the land are prohibited, including we may not plow. Number 2, biblically, the prohibition of plowing a field begins 30 days prior to Shemitah. Toisvis, Shavi'is, like we have for Shabbos, like we have for Yom Kippur, 30 days prior you may not plow, and that's Midoiraisa. Number 2, there is an exception, Midoiraisa, that if you have very young trees, saplings, and these little trees, if indeed the land around them will not be properly plowed, they will die. If you have a density of 10 saplings in every area called a base saw area, if you have that density or even more dense, God allows us to plow the field all the way up until Shemitah. Not on the Shemitah year, but there is no Tois v'Shviz. Where do we get that exception from? That's number one. That's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Number two, arava. Exactly what we're talking about. That in the holy temple, shluchi bezdin would pick up aravos every day. They would bring them to the Beis Hamikdash. The kohanim would do some sort of ceremony, as well. Again, more details. Whether they took it, whether they waved it, whether they beat it, whether they leaned it up against the altar, and that was it. And they just walked around the mizbeach. But there was a arava ceremony that was done. And the third, niso chamayim, the fact that during the 7 days of Sukkot, during the offering of the morning Talmud, when we brought the libations with the animal, aside of the wine that we also poured water, these three halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Bottom line is that arava is a deoraisa. So we're back to the question: why don't we do a zeichel hamikdash? Why don't we have a remembrance every single day of Sukkot with the aravos? Answers the Gemara, Ella Amar Abzavit. In the name of Rava, I'll tell you the difference. Lulav, the Isla Iker Menatoyre Bigvulan. Guys, Lulav, yeah, in the temple, the mitzvah was to take it for 7 days. Usmachtem Lifnei Hashem Alekeichem Shivas Yamim. But even outside the temple, biblically, Ulokachtem Lochem B'Yom HaRishon. Everyone was obligated in Israel, out of Israel, Minatoyra, when there is a temple, when there is no temple. We all have to take the lulav the first day. I know it's only the first day. But since outside the temple at least 1 day is a biblical obligation, that's why Avdin and Leishiva Zeichel HaMikdash. So the Chachamim added, if God wants you to take the lulav everywhere 1 day, since in the temple it was 7, now that there's no Beis HaMikdash, and God willing the temple is going to be built imminently in our days, to remember what needs to happen there, we all take it all 7 days. But the Arava, yes, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or it's actually sourced in Arvei Nachal. But that mitzvah, midoiraisa, was only for the temple. Arava the leis leikim natoyre begvul, and outside the temple, it was never taken. There was no ceremony, there was no mitzvah at all. So even though the sages then gave it, but that was only 1 day. Lo yavdin leishiva zeichel hamikdash. The zeichel hamikdash, the remembrance was only for 1 day. Amar Reish Lakish, another din. That I want you to know that in the temple, the rule normally is that if a kohen has a halachic blemish, even though he wasn't completely out, there was certain, we can call secondary participations of the avodah that he did. For example, who made sure that there are no worms in the pyre wood. Even the kohanim balim mumen were allowed to do it, and other certain secondary services. So says Reish Lakish that kohanim balim mumen, they are allowed to participate in the arava ceremony. Part of it was walking around the altar, which meant that they are even allowed to enter between the antechamber and the mizbeach in order for them to fulfill the mitzvah of arava, or the obligation of arava, which is kind of amazing. And now like this, what's the issue of kohanim walking in that area? If you remember when we learned so many times together, the layout of the temple, we just had it recently a lot in Yuma. So you have the Ezras Yisrael. Then when you go further, after the first 11 Amos, you have another 11 Amos called Ezras Kohanim. And then you come to the altar. Then you have, I think it was the 22 Amos in between the altar and the antechamber. No one was allowed to be there if they don't belong there. Who belongs there? Kohanim. If a kohen has to go into the antechamber, if a kohen has to wash his hands by the shiur, there were certain reasons why you would have to go in there. Being that a kohen that is blemished has no reason to go there, he's not allowed to go there. Now that prohibition of going there, if you're not going there for a purpose, let's accept that is a rabbinic prohibition. The mitzvah of arava, as we just established, is a biblical obligation. The Torah never excluded, whether it is from scripture, whether it is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, for a kohen which was a balmum to walk around the altar. So that's a classical case where a biblical law overrules a rabbinic law. The rabbinic law won't limit it. There are those who hold that a kohen who's blemished may not enter that area in the temple complex is also a biblical prohibition. Nevertheless, let's go esadoy chaloisasa. Whichever instrument, whichever halachic legal instrument we will use, Reish Lakish is innovating that God wants for a blemished kohen to participate in the ceremony, even though that will mean that he's going to enter a place in the temple complex, which normally is not allowed to enter. And Rabbi Yechanan disagreed with him. Amalei Rabbi Yechanan, mi amara, who said that? Who told you that? And the Gemara doesn't understand this question. The Gemara is challenging Rabbi Yechanan's challenge. Mi amara, why Rabbi Yechanan, you're asking who said it? You said it. Ha'iu amar Rabbi Yechanan said it, as we just quoted, the Amar Abasi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, in the name of Rabbi Nechunya Ish Bikas Beis Charson, that Esen Netiyos and Arava and Nisachamayim Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. So if it's a biblical obligation, it makes sense for a kohen who's a balmum. Why should he be excluded? This is not a blood service. This is not a carbon. So if he has to do it, and part of it is walking around the altar, well, then when he goes on the side of the altar, in between the altar and the antechamber, he's going to be in that location. So the Gemara says, no. Rabbi Yechanan meant to ask a double question. Number one, we learned yesterday, we're going to repeat this again. What exactly is this Arava ceremony? There is a machloikas. One opinion holds that the ceremony was taking it in their hands. Okay, if the ceremony is to take it in their hands, so then at least we can accept the premise that since a blemished kohen was also obligated to take it in his hands, and we know that they walk around the altar holding it in their hands, so he has to be there. But chevre, if the mitzvah was only to lean the arava on the sides of the altar, which was called zekifa, then it makes sense that one kohen should lean it against the altar on behalf of all of the other kohanim, and that kohen doesn't have to be a balmum. If it's incumbent on all of the kohanim to walk around, and that's connected to if they all have to hold it, then mela. Maybe the mitzvah is only to zekifa, only to lean it against the walls, and if that would be the case, one can do it for everyone. And furthermore, asks Rabbi Yechanan against his brother-in-law, even if you're going to tell me that the mitzvah was to take it in the hands and and the kohen should walk around the mizbeach holding it, again, who said that God said that a balmum should do it? Maybe the mitzvah, midoraisa, is on kohanim that are tamimim, not on the balmumin. In other words, yes, it's a biblical obligation, but that Rabbi Yechanan is not accepting what his brother-in-law is saying, what Rish Lakish is saying, that even the kohen balmum is included in this obligation, and that would justify him walking in the temple complex in that location, where otherwise he would not be allowed to go. So here we have a machlokes. Now, says the Gemara, Itmer. Rabbi Yechanan. Now listen to these words. After learning almost the whole Amud again and again, that in the Beis HaMikdash, the Arava ceremony is a biblical ceremony. Comes along Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and they have the following argument. One of these two say, these are the very important words, that Arava, the Arava ceremony, Yesoid Neviim. Yesoid is a foundational, but here we'll use the word enactment. Here we're going to associate Yesoid with a takana, with a decree. It's an enactment from the Jewish leadership prior to the time that they were called the Chachamim. This goes back to the times that the leadership was by the Nevi'im, which lived at the times of the judges. That means these are from the earliest rabbinic enactments. But the problem is, we just learned it's a biblical obligation. We'll get to that in a moment. The other one says, don't use the word yisoid, which means a enactment. The arava is a minig. It's a custom that was instituted by the prophets. Now, this is not only semantics. Here is where Rashi says, first of all, what Nevi'im are we referring to? I take back what I said. This goes back to the times of the Shoftim. That's not correct. The Nevi'im that lived during the times of the kings. So Rashi writes, Nevi'im refers to the last Nevi'im. Stand corrected. Who were the last Nevi'im? Chagi, Zechariah, Malachi. They were already part of the Anshe Knesses Hagdolah. Wow. So this is, part of the reformation, the kosher reformation that was done by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, included in the many things that they enacted, like we got to daven with the minyan, we got to daven 2 times a day, or better, even 3 times a day. They made the nusach of the Tefilla. They made the synagogue as a center for Jewish life, because they understood that we're going to be in Golus for a long time, etc., etc. It's a yisoid or a minig. And Lamai Nafkamina, Rashi writes, here's the Rashi over here. The Nafkamina will be that when we take the Aravos now, do you make a bracha? Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu al metilas arava. If you're going to subscribe that the taking of the arava is a yisoid hanavim, yisoid means it's an enactment. Here, we're going to learn everything that I'm saying now is really a machloikas. But let's begin today with the premise that we make brachas for all rabbinic enactments. We're saying that you, God, sanctified us and you commanded us. If we're only doing a rabbinic law, how can we say that God commanded us? Because God commanded us in the Torah, Parsha Shoftim, Lo Yisasur. We should not stray to the right or to the left. We should do what the sages tell us to do. So that's the you commanded me to listen to the sages. If Arava is Yisoid, you make a bracha. According to the other Amoida that holds that it's only a minig, if it's only a custom, that's Rashi, Chevre, we do not make a bracha prior to keeping a minig, even though we should keep it, and it's that important, and minig Yisrael Toirehi, but it's not included in the Lo Yisasur, so you cannot say Vitzivanu. This is very important topics. A lot more in Amid Beis on top of the Tosfos. Okay, now we don't know who said what. So the Gemara says, this time I'll prove it to you, that it was Rabbi Yochanan that said that taking the Arava is Yisoid Nevi'im, greater than Minig Nevi'im. To Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Arava, on a Yisoid Nevi'im, he said clearly Rabbi Yochanan was the one that said. How do we know that from Rababo that it's Yisoid Nevi'im Takatzastayim? Now we got a problem. The problem is that we just quoted, and Rabbi Yochanan is part of that tradition. That Arav is Allah Chalam Moshe Sinai. Amalei Rabzeli Rababo. How can you quote Rabbi Yochanan? Miyam Rabbi Yochanan Hachiv Amar Rabbi Yochanan again. Mishum Rab Nechunya, the man that lived in the valley of Beis Charson. That the law of Eser Netiyos that you are allowed to plant all the way up until Shemitah. There is no Tais v'Shvi'is. And Arava, and it's Chamayim Allah Chalam Moshe Sinai. That's what. So Rababo, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? So first, Eshtoimem Kishachada. That's an expression in Daniel. For a moment he was silent. You needed to think. And then he said, listen to the words of Rababo, that God told this to Moshe. It's not even alluded to in the Torah. Halach Moshe Sinai. And Shechachum. There was a period of time that we forgot it. Now it makes sense. Why would we forget it? Because like Rashi just mentioned, the Nevi'im Achroinim, they lived during the 70 years of Golus. You have to chap that. In other words, during the 70 years that there wasn't a temple, then it makes sense that we forgot certain details of what is done in the temple, because this was only a temple mitzvah. And they came ahead, and we were about to build the second Beis HaMikdash. So v'chazru v'yizdam, they reestablished it. They came ahead and they reminded us, Chavre, remember, it's God told us to do it. So it fits with Yisoid. Yisoid, it's an enactment, but it's not that they enacted it. They reminded us that God enacted it. That sounds like a great answer. Historically, it could make sense. We got a problem. The problem is, it's predicated on the possibility of the Jewish people in Babylonia forgetting one little detail of the Torah, even though it wasn't practiced. And the Gemara is going to reject that. And we're going to reject it based on a story. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. Rabbi Yochanan never subscribes to Shechachum v'chazru v'yizdum. The Shechachum he rejects. Why is that? The last line in the Amid. Because Amar Rabbi Yochanan, guys, this is a story that we have in Bava Kama. And what happened there was that the great Rav Kahana, who did something in Bavel, was afraid of the government and he needed to run away to Eretz Yisrael. That Yidden and Chutz La'aretz, they do something and they run to Eretz Yisrael. Good. When he got there, Rabbi Yochanan met him. And Rabbi Yochanan was so impressed with his knowledge of Torah, and don't forget, he learned in Bavel, that Rabbi Yochanan told all of his students, the last line, V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, that up until now, the L'choin Amri, I always said, the Torah belongs to you. In other words, until today, the people that live in Israel, especially the Yerushalmis, they feel that they have the Torah. Everyone else, they don't know. We know, we have it. The Torah is ours. But now that I met Rav Kahana, I can say the Lahoini, it belonged to Bavel. They knew it, they know it more than us. Now that's a very big statement. And that wasn't only because of the greatness of Rav Kahana. Of course it was. Rav Kahana, by the way, was a Talmud of Rav, and he was a big Charif. He was very sharp, and Rabbi Yechanan never saw that. But Rabbi Yechanan also understood that if Bavel can produce a Zayid like Rav Kahana, then the Torah really belongs to Bavel. What a humbling statement to come from a Yerushalmi. And how can you say Shechachim? So we're back to the question. How can you say that Rabbi Yechanan says Yisoid? I know Yisoid is more than Minik. Rabbi Yechanan said Allah Chalam Moshe Messinai. Here's the very important answer. Loi Kasha, turning to Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis. Kan b'migdash, Dr. Rashi. When do we say it is biblical? Allah Chalam Moshe Messinai in the temple. Yes, in the temple. Allah Chalam Moshe Messinai. Kan, this other statement in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Yisoid Hanavim. You know where it is. Yisoid Hanavim, Big Vulin. Gavaldik. In other words, who outside the temple? Why are we taking on the seventh day? Why are we making a Hoshana Rabbah? Why are we taking out of us? Where did it come from? Machloik is whether it is a Yisoid HaNeviim or whether it's only a Minag Neviim. Now, before we go further, let's look quickly inside the top Tosfos, like he quotes Rashi. Kam b'migdash, kam b'gvulin. Zok Tosfos on top. B'migdash, halach al Moshe Messinai. B'gvulin, that's the machlokes. Pligi. The Rabbi Yechanan says Yisoid HaNeviim. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says we clarified Minig HaNeviim. Uperish b'kontras the nafka mina. What's the difference? The ita kanehi by a bracha. You don't have to make a bracha. Guys, this Tosfos is very important. What Tosfos here does is that he proves and he argues with Rashi. Tosfos holds, not always, but many times even on a minig, we will make a bracha. Rambam paskins like Rashi. Now let me just limit their machlokes. Just the fact is, everyone agrees that whatever it is that we do on Hoshana Rabbah, everyone in their minig, even though we accept that Hoshana Rabbah is Minig Neviim, right? And even though, as we're learning over here, Tosfos says that even for a minig you make a bracha, no one makes a bracha before they do the clapping the Hoshanas, before we bring it on the ground, before the Chibad Hoshanas. That's number one. Number two, Chevra, think about it. What's the second day Yontiv in Chutz La'aretz? What's it called? It's called Minig Aviseinu B'Yadenu. Why are we keeping 2 days Yontiv? Because there was a time that they had a doubt. Now we have no more doubt. Nevertheless, what do we do on the second day Yontiv? Right? We make brachas that are only shaykh for the first day of Yontiv. We make Kiddush. But I want to say on matzah we make the mitzvah of taking matzah is only on the first night. We have it on the second night outside of Eretz Yisrael. Minig, we make up. No one argues with that. And that's an exception. And that sugi is because if we would not make a bracha on the second day Yom Tiv, the Chazal knew that people are going to be very lenient with it. Until today, you see some people who are a little bit learned, Nebach, they think, I know it's only a minute, we don't have to keep it. So there are scenarios where there is no practical machlokes, but there is an in-between area, and the in-between area which Tosfos discusses is halal on Rosh Chodesh. The reason why we say half a halal, even though it's not half, it's almost everything, we just take out 2 kapitelach, is to make it clear that this is not a takanas chachamim. An Yom Tiv, takanas chachamim, midrabanan, yisoid of chachamim. Halal, it's minig. Do you make a bracha or not? So that's the machlokes Rambam and Tosfos. That's the machlokes just between the Ramah and the Mechaber. The Ramah paskins like this Tosfos that you make a bracha. The Mechaber paskins like the Rambam, like Rashi, you don't make a bracha. Now there's just a nuance that by us, even though we follow the Ramah, we Ashkenazim, we in Chabad, the Alter Rebbe follows the Ramah. Nevertheless, when a Yid davens with the minyan, and we all should, what we do is, we ask for the Bal Tefilla to make the bracha, to have everyone else in mind, to give a leg to the others who hold that B'chlal bracha should not be made. So at least you minimize it. But when we daven b'yechidus, which we shouldn't, but if we do, for whatever reason, then we follow the Ramah that a bracha is made even on a minig. Let me just bring up another big topic, and that is when we light the menorah on Chanukah in the Beis HaKnesses, that's a minig, and everyone makes a bracha. And in extension of that, as the Rebbe instituted for menorahs to be lit out there in the street for Mivtzayim, we also make a bracha. And here also, why? Because we compare it to the lighting of the Persumei Nisa in the shul, which is only a minig, just to know this is and everyone makes a bracha. Okay, let's go weiter. Amar Avami. These are loaded dafim. Says Ravami, Arava tzricha shiur. There is a minimum amount of aravas. We're not speaking about height, Rashi reminds us. Even though we did learn above, right, that a arava should have 3 tfachim, we're not talking about the aravas that you put on the lulav. They have to be 3 tfachim tall. Here, it's enough for them to be a minimum amount of height. Here, he's speaking about how many. How many? There is an amount. He didn't say how much. Number 2, you don't take it with anything bound to it. The taking of the arava has to be just the aravos. And number 3, that when you pick up your lulav bundle, even though it has in it aravos, that will not allow you to fulfill the Yesod Hanavim, the Minhag Hanavim. The Gemara doesn't understand why was that last statement even needed. Because once you have the second statement, that you can't take it with anything else with it, it has to be taken bifnei atzma. So isn't it pshita the ein adam yotzi barava shebelulav? It's superfluous. So the Gemara says, no, it's not. Mao the teimam hanimili hechadolei agbei v'adar agbei. Aval agbei v'adar agbei eimaloi. In other words, like we learned on Amud Aleph, one might have thought that when you pick up the lulav bundle twice, why would you pick it up twice? You were already yoitza. So if you pick it up again, and the second time is with the intent for you to fulfill the minhag hanavim of taking on the 7th day bigvulin, taking the aravos, maybe that would be good enough. Komash malan, that it's never, the arava has to be taken by itself. Now, he didn't say yet how many you need to take. So let's go ahead. However, that Adam he disagrees. He holds that as long as you take it twice, when you pick it up again, if you did it with the intent of fulfilling the minhag hanavim, then you fulfill the minhag hanavim. Okay, the first statement of Ravami was that it needs to have a shiur, means he's speaking about the amount of aravos. Amar Rav Nachman, that the minimum amount halachically is gimel badei alin lachim, 3 twigs, but we want for them to be fresh and moist. In other words, we all know that at least by most people, from the dalad minim, the one that gets withered the earliest is the arava. Maybe the hadassah, maybe it's always the aravas. They turn black and they start falling off. So he wants for you to take fresh ones. How many? 3. Rab Sheisha says, and how here goes the initial understanding, afilu ola echad, even if you only have 1 leaf or 1 branch. If he meant either or, that's going to be a big chiddush. So fragt the Gemara ola echad or ubad echad sal kadaitach. What, you just a leaf, not even a branch? Not even a branch, if it's either or, no. That the minimum is ola echad ubibad echad. It's not either or. You need to have 1, even if the 1 branch only has 1 leaf, it's good enough. So there's a machlokes as to how healthy and fresh do they need to be. They both either 3 and fresh, or 1, even if it's already withered. Rashi writes, I'm reading inside the Rashi, starting 12 lines on top of the Amid. Number 1, there is no minimum height, like we spoke out. By the lulav, yes, the arava in the lulav has to have 3 tfachim. The aravas that we take on the Shana Rabbah can be called hu. And now Rashi adds, Vahashto nohagu lohavi, murbiyois anofim aruchim v'yofim. Now, we don't say, even though that you could take 1, but the minhag is not to take only 1, to take many. and they should be long, and they should be beautiful, in order to make a appearance that we are doing this mitzvah, which is really a minig, ba'ayin yav. What was the maximum amount? I mean, what was the machmer opinion of the minimum? 3. However, based on the teachings of the Arizal, we take 5. And I want to speak it out right now. I know we're going to mention this again in the next year. That when we learned yesterday the endings of the Braisa, that about the Baisusim, right? That they did not accept in chibut, shechibut arava. So we said Rashi. Rashi says chibut means to wave. Rashi, the minhag of the Nevi'im, as it was to wave it. The Rambam teaches chibut to bang it. We paskin like the Rambam, that what we do with the arava is we bang it. And let's put it all al pi Kabbalah. We take al pi Kabbalah 5 aravas, and we bang it on the floor 5 times. We have a concept of 5 chasadim and 5 gevuras, even though there are 10 spheres which are in the world of tikkun divided into 3 columns, the right, left, and center, but the ones in the center can go to the sides, and you could set up the spheres where there's 5 to the right and 5 to the left. If all 5 to the left will be called 5 gevuras, even though gevura is a holy attribute, the attribute of judgment, the attribute of preciseness, but if a person is excessive in gevura, it could become something very unholy, something actually evil, something very, very cruel. And we want to bang out, we want to get rid of all of the 5 levels of gevura, that it should not, banging it out means not in its source, but the way they could manifest in a corrupt, unholy way. And for that we take 5 and we bang them 5 times. Actually in the Siddur, we say that Yehi Ratzon, and we make mention over there that what we are doing is minhag Nevi'im. It's all consistent. We don't make a bracha because it's minhag Nevi'im. If we would have held that b'gevulin it's Yesoid Nevi'im, then we would have made a bracha prior to the clapping, to the banging of the Ishanas. Weiter. Now the Gemara says a story. Amar Aivu. Now, Chavra Rashi writes like this. Rav's father's name was Aivu. Rav also had a grandchild that was named Aivu. Even if you only name a child after the passing of, well, it makes sense that a grandchild should be named after the great-grandfather. I'm just saying this not to confuse one Aivu with the other. This Aivu, says Rashi, was Rav's father. Aivu says like this, that Havo Koamina Kamei de Rab Loza ben Rab Tzadik. I was once standing in front of Rab Loza ben Rab Tzadik, and I witnessed the following. There was a person that came with his arava. He came with an arava, shakil, and he took it, chavit. Again, Rashi says he waved it. Why double? Because we learned before that waving it is extending out and bringing in all of the directions, and up and down. That's chavit l'Rashi. Rambam says chavit means he beat it, he clapped it, and more than once. Again, al pi Kabbalah 5 times, but even al pi Nigla, you bang it more than once. However, v'loi barech, once I witnessed the minhag being done, the bracha was not made. Is araya, like we're learning, because it's only minhag Nevi'im. If he would have subscribed that it's Yesoid Nevi'im, then a bracha would have been made. Weiter. Aivu and Chizkiah. Now this Aivu and Chizkiah, this is the great grandson of Aivu, the original one. They were the grandchildren of Rav. They were the sons of the daughter of Rav. Rav is the Zayda, and the elder Zayda is Aivu. Aisa arava lekamed Rav, and here also chavit v'loi barech. Here again, v'kosavar, because it's minhag Nevi'im. Next. Amar Aivu. Now we're going back to the father of Rav. Now that we quoted Aivu, I want you to know again, there was another time that I was in front of the great Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Tzadik, and I witnessed the following. Asa lekamei gavra, a person came in front of Aivu, and Amar lay, and he told to Aivu, this man tells Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Tzadik, he tells the Rav, and Aivu then was like the Talmud getting shimush. He told him the following, that Kiriyasa Isli, that I own villages, I own villages. He means that he had a big business and he employed entire villages. He had a lot of workers. And also, karmaya isli, I own many vineyards. And zeisaya isli, I own many olive trees. Now, what happened? That va'asu b'nei kiriyasa, my workers, the people that live in the villages, they would come, and Rashi says they came, he's speaking about on the Shemitah year, umekashkeshin b'karmayu, they are hoeing my vineyard. Now guys, hoeing, l'cho'ura, should be something prohibited on the Shemitah year. Midoiraisa, at least midrabanan, right? Hoeing are different types of work that you do with an instrument called a hoe. It many times refers to making holes in the ground around trees or around the vines to make the earth softer, which will make the product, which will make the growth come even better. There are certain other types of hoeings that we'll mention in a moment. Whatever they were doing obviously was permitted. The question wasn't about this type of hoeing. The problem is that this Yid allowed the workers to get paid by them taking olives from his olive trees. Now we just learned above some of the laws of Shemitah. If you own land in Israel, so then you have to leave your fields abandoned, so to say, opened for everyone to be allowed to take from it, including you. But you cannot store, you cannot hoard, you can take what you need a little bit. Now these people had a lot of respect to the boss. They worked for him. Again, we'll discuss in a moment why the work itself is not problematic. But the way they were paid is that they went into his fields and they took from the olives. Now guys, these fields were not guarded. Anyone else could have done it, but people didn't do it. So the workers got paid from Peirei Shvi'is. It gives the appearance that the Balabas was himself hoarding, gathering a lot of olives to pay his workers with. That's something that he should not do, but he didn't do that. So he did not do anything wrong. It had an appearance of him almost like guarding his fields and using his fruit of Shemitah to pay his workers. It didn't look good. So this Yid asked Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadik, arech or loy arech? It's good to know, Chavre, in Kabbalah, arech hanpen, right? Long. In Nigla, the word arech means proper. Rashi writes, is it proper or not proper? Very important word. Not halachically okay, mutter or asur. No. It was halachically, by the letter of the law, it was okay, but there was a certain appearance. It looked like he was doing he was using personal usage from his Peirei Shvi'is. So Amalei, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadik told him, lo yarech. Nish, it's not proper. You know what this Jew did? The first thing he did is he ran out to stop it. You know, when you are told that something is halachically prohibited and you immediately put stop to it, that is what's expected from us. Here, it wasn't a isur. It's not proper. This guy was so careful that first he needed to ask more questions of the Rav. He came back later to do that. First, have a koshavik leiv azl. First, he ran out to put an immediate end to it. And when Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadik realized how diligent this Jew is in keeping the mitzvahs, even something which is only about proper or not proper, he right away put it into action. So Amar, this is what Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadik said, and it was heard by Aivu, that Kedu Havesi Doire Ba'ayda Hoda. I'm already living in this land. Mem Shinin for 40 years. V'loi Chamisi Bar Inish, I never saw a son of a man, Bahalach Ba'orchen the Saknan Kandain, that goes on such an upright path like this one. He was very impressed how this year again, right away, followed a halachic ruling, which wasn't that what you're doing is asur. What you're doing is not proper. But he wasn't done yet. First of all, he put a stop to it, and then Hadar Asi, he returned. And this man asked Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadik, okay, my ma'abed, how do I proceed from here? These people, they're hoeing. How do I pay them? So Amalei, let make it clear. Afkir zeisayo lechashoichiya. Make sure that your olives are abandoned to the poor. Doesn't mean, chashoicha means dark, it means to the poor. It doesn't mean to the poor. It means make sure that everyone understands that you're not guarding your fields. Everyone has the right to take your olives. It should not be used for payment. You want to pay your workers? Out of pocket. The same pritaya, give the prutalach from your pocket to the ones lekashkushe keramim. Don't make use of the olives. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to understand, how can you hoe a field on the Shemitah? V'kashkushe misharei ay v'hatanya. A brisa that's specifically referring also to hoeing, that when it says regarding the Shemitah years, that v'hashvis, and on the 7th year, tish metena. Tish metena means you shall leave it, leave the field. Unetashta, you shall forsake it. A double expression, says the Torah Shebal Peh. Tish metena, leaving it, means don't hoe it, milakashkesh. Unetashta, you should forsake it, means milasakel. Many times, when you clear little stones off a field, it helps the product grow better. Don't even clear stones. All of this is already alluded to in the Torah. So Amar Avukva Bar Chama, this is so gavaldik. Today, kashkushay hava, there are two types of hoeing. One type of hoeing, chad setume pile. One type of hoeing is to cover cracks. If the roots have cracks that are exposed to the ear, it will ruin, dry out, at least make inferior the vines. Hoeing there would mean to properly cover the cracks that it should not be exposed. Guys, this is not to make something good be better. This is to prevent your trees, your vines of getting ruined. That's permitted. That's permitted. Prevention of loss is permitted. However, the braisa that does not allow hoeing, that's chad avruye ilane. Avruye means to bring health. In our case, it means to strengthen. In other words, there are no cracks, there's nothing exposed. You want to soften the land around the vines to make the grapes even better. That's also noch min ha-Torah. Ivruye ilane aser. So tome pile sharei. Let's go weiter. Amar Aivu, again, in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok. Once all of this came about, he just wanted to bring out, it began by showing that we accepted that it's only a minig on Avim. But now we're going another Aivu in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok. Guys, we learned in Brachas that an average person can walk 10 parsois a day. Erev Shabbos, I hope the connection is good, even though we're live hooked up. That Erev Shabbos only walk 3 parsa. That's less than a third what you normally walk. Less than a third. It's not because you're going to start walking late. People should begin walking early in the morning when it gets light. You should be yoytze b'chi toiv, right? As we learned in the beginning of Brachas Daf Beis. Only walk 3 parsa, which means that you will get to your destination way early Friday. And why is it important for you to get to your destination way early Friday? Because if you will get there very late, they might not know that you are coming, and there won't be enough time for food to be prepared for you. And so what? We'll see so what in a moment. Now there are 2 versions of how we apply that. Version number 1, Amar Rav Kahana, what we just mentioned today, the great Rav Kahana, the Charif. He said that lo yamar, and this statement was only if you are going home. What happens if you go home? Guys, on Shabbos, especially on Shabbos, we have to make sure that the environment in the home is peaceful and beautiful. And if a man who comes home will not have food prepared for him because they didn't even know he's going to be there, but there's no food for him, he's going to get upset. And it's going to bring a bad ruach in your house on Shabbos. But if a person is traveling l'ushpize, you are going to an inn, which means that you brought food with you. What a pity over here, we lost it. Oh, we're back over here. We're back over here. On mute, here we go. I'm sorry, we didn't lose anything yet. We're going to have to see what the solution for this will be because we're hooked up online, live. But if you're going to any place other than your home, that means that you are carrying provisions with you. So then, you are relying on what you have. So this is not about don't travel because you might not come to your destination. You might spend Shabbos in the field. You might, God forbid, have to be mechal. No. This is pashut that if you're going to come to a place that has no food for you, you'll be upset with them. There'll be a bad energy for Shabbos. However, there's another version that Rav Kahana says, Lo nitzrocha ela afilo lebeisim. Certainly, if you're going to another location, you should for sure not travel more than 3 parsois. because you're going to be upset with them if they have no food for you. Even if you're going home, what's the even to the home? So Rashi, 4 lines in the bottom of the Amid says that a person, the Masha Moitzi Ima'atim Rav Shaloyu, you would have thought that in your home, since you own it, even though there'll be a little bit of food, some of it will remain for you. Still, even on that, says Rav Kahana, that Afal Pikein Lo Yahalech. I'm reading inside the Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, and V'kolchchen Le'oishpize, and certainly, I know you lost me, guys, but and certainly if you go to an inn, the second version is a lot more chamur. Don't travel. I want you to know 2 things. Number 1, we paskin like the second version. But 2 things. Number 1, today you have communications. Today you can notify your destination that you're coming. And most importantly, in Shulchan Aruch, even before there's phones, since there is an abundance of food now compared to how it used to be, there's going to be enough food for another person. We're not afraid that there won't be food for you. Let's go quickly. I myself traveled, and you know what happened? I came to a inn. Kasa da harsana is like a Shabbos dika dish, which was relatively the most cheap, the least expensive dish. It's small fish that's fried in its own oil and flour, and I didn't even have that. In other words, make sure that you come early enough out of Shabbos for them to have enough time to buy and to prepare more food for you. Let's chaparain and go until the Mishnah. So 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that mitzvahs lulav keitza, Tani Tanach made Rav. One Tana learned our Mishnah in front of Rav by heart, in front of Rav Nachman, I'm sorry, or Kameid, Rav Yehuda, here in the Meseidas Hashas, that the Mishnah says that they would put the lulavim on top of the roof, on top of the benches. That is where they would leave it. The problem is, daf mem hey v'chili yapsham utzarich. What, you kidding? You're going to put your lulav exposed to the elements up there, until you take it, the sun is beating on it, it's going to dry out. That's not good. The version in the Mishnah was different. Al gabay yitzta, but they put it on the benches, under the roofs. They put it in a location where it was protected. And indeed, Amar Rachava, in the name of Rav Yehuda, that there were so many benches in the perimeter. There were so many benches in the perimeter of Harabayis, and that was that Harabayis Tov Kaful Hoya. There were double rows of benches, meaning Stav Lifnim is Stav, 1 row within the other, completely surrounded with benches. It was done taka for people who come to Harabayis to have a place where to sit down, and there was that many benches that all of these hundreds of thousands of Daled Minim sets fit and were there. And again, all of that was until people really started to fight and there was a certain amount of sakana, and because of that they abolished that decree and they said that everyone should take it in their homes. God willing, to be continued.